Does artificial intelligence use too much power? This is a conversation that some colleagues and I were having earlier today, and it got me thinking because as someone who's interested in Bitcoin, and I'm sure if there are other Bitcoiners who are watching this, if you're not someone who's interested in Bitcoin, I have one or two videos on the topic. You can check those out. But as someone who's interested in Bitcoin and who has been interested in Bitcoin, the issue of power usage has come up. This was an early critique of Bitcoin, and it kind of went away and reared its head for a while not that long ago. And only recently do we have some good research showing that Bitcoin can use captured energy that would otherwise be wasted, that wouldn't be able to get to the end users. Also, Bitcoin can use renewables in ways that wasn't initially thought, and not to mention also using wasted energy like flared gas from oil rigs, etc. So Bitcoin has proven itself to be pretty docile in terms of being able to use stranded energy or wasted energy. And what I haven't heard a lot of though is many of the pro Bitcoin people who are critical of artificial intelligence. It seems, at least from my perspective, I seem to be one of the few people that I know at least who's someone who's interested in Bitcoin who also has some reservations about artificial intelligence. And I've heard plenty of people who have reservations about both artificial intelligence and Bitcoin, but I haven't heard many people who are in favor of Bitcoin but have some hesitation about artificial intelligence. I think the issue when it comes to the question of power usage with artificial intelligence is it's hard to understand exactly, it's hard to make a calculation rather of what that energy is going to. I think with Bitcoin, it's a much easier question because Bitcoin is such a singular or such a uni-purpose tool. Obviously, there are attempts, some of them more successful than others, to have Bitcoin do other things, to build layers on top of Bitcoin that do things other than the money app, which is its main application. And so for Bitcoin, I think it's a much easier question of whether it uses too much energy. Um, you have the question of, okay, how much energy is it worth to have a money that is hard capped, that is digital and scarce, that isn't controlled by any central actor, isn't controlled by a company. To me, that has immense value. Others might disagree, and if you do, I'd love to hear your thoughts. But that application of that I just laid out has lots of value to me, and from my point of view. And so, but even if one didn't think so, it's still a much easier calculation to make, which is how much energy is this application using? Is this application of sovereign, stateless, fixed money, gold-like money that's digital? How much is that worth? We could make that calculation, and some people would have different thresholds of what they think is acceptable and what isn't. But well, the artificial intelligence question, I think, is a different one or a harder one because there are so many things that artificial intelligence can do. And I mean, in theory, if we're reaching for artificial general intelligence, I mean, it could do all kinds of, or pretty much all human thinking, all human innovation. And so that comes with the good and the bad, right? That we were using we could use this to help with medical data. We could use it for certain teaching applications, but we could also use it for things that are incredibly frivolous, creating fake, deep fake memes, all kinds of other things, using it for students to cheat on homework, all kinds of applications. And so it's a much muddier question, I think. So because it's hard to separate out, at least for me, it's hard to separate out the positive applications from the negative applications of AI, especially if artificial general intelligence is the goal. If the general is part of the goal, then we're gonna have to take all of these applications in aggregate and decide whether they're worth the energy input that goes into artificial intelligence. So it's it's not as granular, you might say, as Bitcoin, which is like I said, it's a uni-purpose or a mono-purpose tool, which is it does the application of money and doesn't really do anything else. And so I think the calculation is a much easier one, and I would argue that for Bitcoin, the cost of the electricity, even if the electricity use went up significantly, that having a money that no one can print more of, or that anyone could essentially dilute, which is also diluting one's labor, that's incredibly valuable. I mean, we saw in analog times that gold had incredible value in large part because of that, because it had those fixed, it had not a fixed supply, but a very stable, inelastic supply. And so with artificial intelligence, I have some hesitation because I see some of the positive application, and a lot of the positive applications are theoretical now. But a lot of what I'm seeing is artificial intelligence being put to use that is could probably be classed as frivolous or um, not really worthy of the power. So I'm gonna reserve judgment on it's whether artificial intelligence writ large is worth the power consumption. Certainly, present day, as of recording this, August 26th or August 27th, 2025, it the usage I'm seeing it put to now is I'm not sure it's worth the power consumption. And I'm happy to revisit this in the future when we have we have some more of these um, singular uses for it, when it's not large language models that to a large extent are being used for ways that are probably not worth the power consumption.